I've said this before in the past, but one of my favorite things about shipwrecks is to compare them to how they looked in their prime. It's absolutely magical and at the same time spooky to look at images of these shipwrecks and realize that at one point they carried real people. People who lived, ate, and slept on this ship. Then you realize that you are at the bottom of the ocean with the same ship now resting in its forever grave, almost still in time. Titanic is one of the most spooky ships to do a now and then comparison on, as many of the areas you think of when hearing Titanic are still intact, at least for now. This is the exact spot Titanic's band played as the ship began her final plunge. This was the first part of the boat deck to begin flooding, as water rushed over the bridge and as passengers attempted to get to a temporarily safe spot. These areas are now 12,500 feet below the surface, with the events that took place in these spots now 110 years in the past. It's almost impossible to think that such a tragic event took place on what is now a slowly crumbling hulk. But the more you think about it, the more surreal it becomes. Titanic's interiors, as they are on the wreck today, are even more surreal for the same reasons. Today, we will explore these interior spaces as they appear on the wreck today, and I hope that, in the end, you'll come out of this video with more knowledge and respect for the tragedy. These gates, which remain closed to this day, cover two gangway doors. These specifically are the gangway doors which, when open, were the entryway for most first-class passengers. One of the gangway doors on the port side was found open on the wreck and eventually completely fell off the ship. It was then recovered and is now a museum artifact. As first-class passengers entered the ship, the first thing they would see are these set of doors, which led into the reception room. Even though they are a shadow of their former selves, most of the ornate decoratives are still intact, and pretty soon you'll be seeing a pattern. The more preserved something is on the wreck, the more spooky and surreal everything becomes. Moving around the remains of Titanic's reception room, you may notice many octagon-shaped light fixtures still attached or hanging down from the ceiling via wires. The glass casing, which once covered the lights, is completely gone from every single one that is shown in the footage, but the actual octagon-shaped fixtures themselves are still intact and show little signs of corrosion. While some have been overgrown with rusticles, many of the reception room support columns are still standing. Taking a closer look, you can still make out the lavish woodwork more than a century later. An absolutely remarkable piece of preservation are the still intact stained glass window panels. The color is slightly faded, but the fact that they are still intact and in place after everything they have gone through is incredible. The wood paneling surrounding them is still mostly intact, although just like the rest of the wreck, the white paint is absent. Half of Titanic's first-class dining saloon was destroyed when the ship fell to the bottom. What is left is mostly filled nearly to the ceiling with silt and fallen resticles. Just like the reception room though, some of the stained glass window paneling is still intact, which is even more impressive given that the room was nearly crushed. This collapsed and mangled wreckage is what is left of the first-class gymnasium on the boat deck. Ironic since this area was the most photographed part of the ship's interior, yet today there really isn't anything left that distinguishes it as the gymnasium. Similarly, the once grand staircase is no more than a gaping hole that goes down to E deck. The boat deck part of the grand staircase is mostly collapsed, which I would contribute to the dome caving in during the sinking. A deck was once home to some of the most ornate and luxurious public spaces on the ship. Today, not a single one outside the grand staircase lobby can be viewed. The first-class smoking room, let's just say it's a work in progress. The aft grand staircase was completely obliterated when the ship broke in two, although a piece of the dome was found in the debris field. Evidence of the first-class lounge and reading and writing room still exists in the form of the raised roof, but the spaces themselves are crushed. Amazingly, all three of the elevators in the A-deck grand staircase lobby are still intact. Directly in front of these elevators can be seen the protruding letters A-deck. Titanic's grand staircase lobbies on A and B deck were lit up with many of these ornate glass pearl light fixtures. Many of them are still attached to the ceiling today, incredibly intact. At the bottom of this gaping hole on the wreck are several steel beams on C and D deck. This appears to be the only remnants of the grand staircase. Pieces of what I can only assume is the dome are resting on it. Descending down to E deck are more remnants of the grand staircase and dome. Down on F deck, just below where the grand staircase ends, are the Turkish bathrooms, decorated in Middle Eastern style. Somehow, even after everything it went through, the ship splitting, the descent, the heavy smash onto the sea bottom, the cooling room is still intact, and in fact is one of the most well-preserved public spaces on the ship. The chairs are mostly well-preserved, albeit flipped upside down. The floor is almost completely viewable, unlike most of the other interior spaces. The wall tiling looks almost completely like new. The ceiling with the ornate light fixtures are still intact, etc. Just see for yourself. Near the ceiling, above the remains of a door frame, is a fixture resembling a half dome. This is here simply to add more of a Middle Eastern feel to the room. Today on the wreck can be seen 3 open cargo hatches, 1 on the forecastle and 2 on the well deck. Traversing down into the latter, you reach a vast space. This is what remains of the third-class open area. This is one of the many drinking fountains on the ship. Its shimmer can still be seen. At a first glance, you wouldn't be able to tell these open spaces were once cabins. But the sad truth is that most of the interior walls on the ship have collapsed, leading to what were once independent cabins becoming steerage. Luckily, many of the furniture and furnishings in the rooms are still intact, leading to much repetition going through footage. In order not to make this section not become repetitive, I will only be pointing out the most notable features in the footage. If you wish to go through every inch of each cabin on each deck, I have linked below the YouTube channel Titanic Archive Project, which is where I've been sourcing most of the footage used in this video. From the outside, the officers' quarters appears to be in prime condition. The interiors, on the other hand, haven't held up nearly as well. Most of the area is now an empty shell, with unrecognizable debris strewn about the floor. Because of this, you end up with some honestly cool sights if I'm being completely honest. Here lies the remains of the Marconi Room. It was originally believed that Titanic's Marconi Room was identical to Olympic's, but we now know that in fact it had a different layout with an extra room to the right. Because of the collapse of the forward officers' quarters, the wall from which Captain Smith's bathroom resides has been pulled back, revealing what the space has to offer. Looking through the mountains of footage, one feature that stands out to me from the many cabins are the bed frames, which look completely unchanged after more than a century on the bottom. This is one of the mirror/sink/storage furnishings, possibly from cabin A29. Cabins on A deck had windows which could be opened and swung out with the turn of two knobs. Here is a close-up of this mechanism. Here, an ROV enters cabin B3 through a window in the forward superstructure. More evidence of the ship's hard crash onto the sea bottom is the bed frame of cabin B5. It's shifted back all the way to the opposite wall of where it should be. I can't confirm this, but I'm pretty sure the image you're looking at now is the remains of cabins C29 and C31, judging by porthole placement relative to the bed frame and picture. Here's a close-up of one of these portholes. Weirdly enough, this particular style of porthole doesn't swing open. Rather, they rotate to an open or closed position. You can see this on the wreck, as well as from some 1912 photos. Just like most furnishings I've labeled so far, I can't say for sure where this dual sink is located, as this type doesn't appear on deck plans for any of the forward sea deck cabins. I'm guessing this is from the ladies' lavatory, although yet again, I can't say definitively. Arguably the most luxurious private space on the ship was the parlor suite sitting room C55, occupied by Isidor Strauss and Ida Strauss. Decorating the rich wood paneling was 24-karat gold gilding all around. Much of these ornate decoratives are still in place on the wreck. Likewise, the fireplace and clock are also still intact and in place, the woodwork almost unchanged. While there are still things I haven't gone over, most of which were things that simply couldn't be explored, that was more or less the entirety of what Titanic's interior spaces have to offer on the wreck. After making nothing but shipwreck videos for 3 months straight, I am quite burnt out of this topic, and probably won't do something as research intensive for quite a while.